Good morning. We today are here to celebrate Hilda Gewin in her 100th year on this earth. She has written a book at the suggestion of her family about her life, and we're using this book today to as a guide for Hilda to go through her story and tell you about her life, beginning um, when she was born in Connecticut.
I'll say that.
Okay, so we'll let Hilda go from here.
I was born in New Haven, Connecticut, because my father was a classics professor at Yale. Had two brothers, Peter and Ross, and two sisters. But at that time, I just had one sister. When I was 8 years old, my father had a sabbatical year for studying in Europe. He took his wife, two sons, and two daughters, first driving through France in a convertible Chevrolet, going through Switzerland, over the Alps, and down to Rome, where he was going to study, where my father was. We left the boys in Vevey, Switzerland, to go to a boarding school in a place called La Clairière. In France, we discovered that my mother was pregnant. So my father had to find the only good friend doctor whom he knew in Europe. It was in Turkey. He was a missionary. So after 6 months in Rome and a month in Greece, we headed for Istanbul to await the birth of my sister Elizabeth. We stayed with the Shepherd family because Dr. Shepherd said that their 5 children would be going to college in the United States. In Turkey, the boys and I went to school with the Shepherd family on a ferry boat across the Bosphorus to an American school in Asian Turkey. Elizabeth was born in May 1933, so we went to Europe with 4 children and came home with 5. Back home, I grew up in a big house in New Haven with 8 bedrooms and 8 bathrooms, which we needed. We had 5 children. The exciting time was in the summer. Every summer and Christmas vacations, the family would go to Washington, Connecticut, to my Aunt Lou's house, Hilltop. Washington is a small town, 3,000 population all year, and swelling with many residents who worked in New York, coming for peace and quiet and simple living. We had a good gang of teenagers with whom we would play tennis and swim and party. Some friends had playhouses where we would hang out. We didn't have cell phones, but we did have a telephone central who knew every place we were. She would tell my mother, they just left the Bickelhops and they're going on to the Swans. Back home, my brothers went to a private grammar school not far away, and I walked to the public grammar school. I went through public schools, had a wonderful time, and had good teachers and so forth. But on my college board, I only finished 1/2 of the math section. So I kept wondering, how on earth did I ever get into college? Because I hadn't finished it. I went to Vassar because my mother and other relatives went there, had a wonderful time making lifelong friends. An interesting fact is that total tuition and board was $1,250. Can you imagine? Vassar during the war was female except for weekends. I just remembered that we were quarantined for the first 10 weeks because of polio, I think. Anyhow, we knew that we were an ivory tower up above everything that was going on in the world. We didn't have television and we had newspapers, but World War II was going on when we were there, the whole time we were there. And so we knew that we were in an ivory tower, but we did have newspapers, newsreels, and V-mail during the war. V-mail was what we wrote to our boyfriends overseas. I had 5 wonderful roommates, and the last one of them died this spring, so pretty long living. After graduation, I had a job with the government, which could have led to a knowledge of Japanese codes, but the war was over after graduation, so I had to go home to look for a job. My father found me a very satisfying job buying books for the Yale Library. My job was to assign a special fund to pay for each book. So every book bought by the library went over my desk. What a temptation. It was interesting that all my friends wore blue jeans. I did not wear them because I didn't have the shape for them, but my roommates did. And it was very unusual when my fiance came up to Vassar with me. He looked around and he said, I feel as though I ought to be wearing a skirt, because he came from Vanderbilt and they had requirements that all the girls had to wear skirts at least for dinner.
Hilda, tell me when you began to sing in the choir.
Pretty soon. I was lucky to have gotten chosen to sing in the choir. There were 100 girls, and it was a wonderful experience. I loved singing there and really enjoyed singing in choral music ever after that. I had grown up with a wonderful 8th grade teacher who I was so scared of, and she taught classical music education. And as I say, I was scared of her, but I learned a lot. And I also learned a great deal singing with 100 girls in the Vassar choir, and I loved it.
What was that when you were at Vassar and you were learning all of these wonderful things that you wanted to learn at Vassar? You also learned to clean bathrooms, right?
Oh, well, that's true. We were there during the war, and the hired help got better jobs, and so they left. And so we had to answer the phone, and we had to clean bathrooms. What else did we do?
You did all.
I waited on table.
The work.
We had to wait on table. That's right. We did that, but it was good training. But that's enough of that.
Mm-hmm. After graduation, you worked at the Yale Library.
Did I tell that? I didn't. Well, I lost this job for the government because the war was over. And so my father took me around to his friends to ask if they had a place for me. No, I wasn't a Phi Beta Kappa, and I wasn't an average person. But he did find me a wonderful job working in the Yale Library, which is a beautiful library. And my job was to assign the fund money to each book that went over my desk. And what a temptation it was to see every single book that the Yale Library bought during that year and not be able to read it. I read the first part of it, and then I read the last part of it, but then I had to pass it down. It was a good job, but then I met Henry, and so that was the end of my job. I worked for $100 a month, and I would have done it forever. I think I enjoyed it so much.
Good. You said once if you hadn't met Henry, you might still be there.
That's true. Well, is it time to say how I met Henry? Is that what it's time?
Yeah, tell us how you met Henry. Who introduced you, and then about the.
Well, do you remember I said we lived with the Shepherd family and their 5 children while we were waiting for Elizabeth to be born, and Alice Shepherd turned out to be Alice Carey, and she was an intern at Yale. The children did come to this country for their college, and he was an intern. She was an intern at Yale, and Henry. How did Henry know me? Alice knew. Alice knew me, of course, and Henry asked Alice if he knew any nice girls, because he said he was very lonesome and very homesick away from Alabama. And so she set up this blind date for us. and he must have
She's being modest. He asked if there were any nice, good-looking girls.
well, anyhow, he must have called me because I did drive my father's car down to the hospital where he had his room. And then we took his car to a restaurant where I looked at the right side of the menu because I'd heard that interns didn't have much money. I was going to get cheap meal, but it turned out interns didn't have any money anyhow. But he immediately said, well, I hear they have good steaks here. So that's what we had was steaks. And we dated, we went out together every night that he wasn't on call. He was on call about 3 nights.
What about when he took you home that night?
Oh, that's right. My family locked me out then, and for some reason I didn't ring the doorbell. But we had a door, a dog door, and Henry put his big shoulders in the dog door and went in and unlocked the door and locked me in. And then Nancy wanted me to say that after that I couldn't remember his name. And so my father had to look up all the names in the medical school till I finally got Gewin. It's not a very common name, but I finally got that. So anyhow, we dated for 3 months and got engaged, which was amazing because he had told me all about his life in Mobile and the people he loved, and he always said he wanted to go back to Mobile. So I don't know why I got engaged to him, and we got married after I'd known him 6 months. I got married in June, and we had a lovely honeymoon in New Hampshire, and then we rode down to Mobile from Connecticut, leaving my family. So glad that so many of my friends came because that was not wartime, but we'd just been getting over the war and people didn't have cars, and the only way you could get to Washington was by car. There's no buses or trains or anything. And I was glad that my college friends came. And
then after the wedding, they went to New Hampshire for the
went to New Hampshire for
honeymoon.
On the lake for a honeymoon.
And then headed south.
And then came back to just make touch with my family, who I was leaving forever. And we started driving down from Connecticut to Mobile. And I might add here that at that point, I had never been farther south than New York City except one time. And one time I did go to Washington, D.C. to get this job. But that was a drop of faith, I would say, for me to go down there.
And how old were you then?
I was 21. Old enough to know better, probably. And I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about the South. There was a black girl that worked in the library, and I thought she could tell me what things were like in Mobile. And what she told me, I invited her to the wedding, which was unusual, and she declined, but she was wonderful. But she told me what I needed to do was learn how to make biscuits.
Did you learn how to make biscuits?
Did you
I
learn to make biscuits?
didn't. She told me I needed to.
Oh, you needed to. Okay, never mind.
No, but anyhow, you're going to ask me our trip down.
Your mother didn't cook much either. You had
Oh,
Edith
my mother-
Jarvis, right?
No, my mother was a good cook, very good cook, and she had Edith, who worked for us, who stayed on the place, and Mother was so embarrassed at how little she paid her a week, $8 a week, I think. She was so embarrassed about that. But Mother was a good cook, and when she didn't have all these helpers anymore, she would do the cooking and wash the pots and pans, and Mary and I would sing all the college songs and wash the dishes and everything.
On the way, how did you entertain yourself on the way from down south?
Well, we asked each other a lot of questions and everything, but mostly our entertainment would be singing, but he couldn't carry a tune. And so the job was for me to figure out what he was singing. He couldn't carry the tune and I couldn't tell. But when he came out with, "Yay, Alabama," I knew what he was talking. That's about what all he could do. So I was ready for Alabama when I went down
That
there.
wasn't the first time you heard about Alabama.
Well, I hadn't heard about
University
it.
of
I
Alabama.
hadn't heard about it very much.
Really?
From Memphis to Mobile. That's the first time I heard about Mobile. Okay. So we got down to Mobile and met his parents. Wonderful people. And can you imagine being a Southern lady, meeting your Yankee daughter-in-law for the first time? But she was great. She introduced me to all Henry's high school friends, and Mobile is a very welcoming place, I think. I'm sure other people have different ideas, but I think it is very.
But on the way, you were having some reservations when you began to see the changes, the difference.
Well, I wondered if there was a city at the end of this. You know, Alabama in those days was mostly cows and cotton and things like that on the way in small towns. I didn't think there was going to be an Alabama, Mobile at the end of it, but it was.
And then when you got here, what did you think?
Well, immediately I met his parents and we got started. He had to find us a place. He was stationed in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and he was stationed at Veterans Hospital as a doctor, and other doctors came there. We had a wonderful time in Tuscaloosa, and no excuse for cheering for the Crimson Tide since then. We made good friends. Is there anything you needed to ask about?
What I heard in the conversations is she just adapted wherever she was. She just adapted to it and rolled with the flow.
Well, I had Henry,
Yeah.
and he took care of everything, so it was good. But people were wonderful. So I did get to meet all his high school friends, and that was good. You want me to tell about Henry, how he got to New Haven?
Sure.
Okay, Henry was born in Demopolis, Alabama in 1921, and he went through schools there, and he came to Mobile because his father was a United States Marshal, and so he went to high school here. He went to Murphy High School. He was actually president of the student council, which was pretty nice there, and he did make lots of friends. Well, he'd always wanted to be a doctor, and his grades were good enough, so he went to Vanderbilt undergraduate school, and from there to Vanderbilt College. But it was wartime, so he went through his freshman year to his graduation from medical school was only 6 years. It was short. Everybody was accelerating that. Mm-hmm. But he did graduate first in his class in medical school, which was good. Mm-hmm. And then fortunately, and he also made a lot of friends.
There was an overlap there.
It was. He was still going to Vanderbilt undergraduate when he started medical school, and that's because it was wartime.
So he never slept.
No,
He didn't have time to sleep.
He didn't sleep, that's right.
And you met his parents for the first time when you got here because his dad had tuberculosis.
That's true. They couldn't come to our wedding because he was sick, and he died in a couple of years, unfortunately.
And then after Tuscaloosa, you went back to New Haven.
Right. We were in Tuscaloosa for 2 years, and then he had to go back to New Haven for more medical training, and he
Residency.
And he was a resident there in the medical school, and he became the chief resident on medicine, and he worked for well-known doctors who were scientists and everything, and they wanted him to stay up there, but he said no. He got tired of feeding alcohol to rats, and he wanted to go back home to Mobile and take care of sick people.
But that was, that New Haven was when you became acquainted with people in Junior League.
That's when we went back to New Haven so he could get his training, and I didn't want to spend too much time about that, but my aunt did introduce me to the Junior League, and I didn't want to join here, but because I thought it was a bunch of socialites, but turned out that I met all of Henry's friends that were wonderful people, and I thought, well, it must not be all that bad, and it turned out that I got to know many lifelong friends, and so it was a good thing.
And then after that you returned to Mobile and bought the house in Old Shell. Or
all right.
his brother had
We
bought
were
the house for you.
in New Haven. He was still studying. This was we were to move back to Mobile in January, but we bought a house, our house, which is on Old Shell Road, sight unseen. And at that time, I think as head resident, he was making $100 a month. And I thought, how are we going to buy a house? His brother bought it for us, and he just got to talking to the bankers, and I can remember when we finally paid off the mortgage. And it was a wonderful house. Very disappointing when I saw it for the first time because it was all covered with mildew. It hadn't been taken care of, and the outside was mildew. And it was when Henry ran out of space, he just would buy another room.
And another room?
Add another room. So
this is much bigger than it was originally.
no, it's about the same size. That's a picture of it now. I like the people that bought it.
Okay, you returned to Alabama in 51.
That's true. And joined the Spring Hill Presbyterian Church.
And he became a member of the Diagnostic and Medical Clinic.
That's right. Dr. Seegers had asked him before we came down. Dr. Seegers had asked him to become a member of the firm, and so he and Dr. Bill Atkinson became good friends. And an interesting thing is, Henry and Bill were partners for years and years, and now Bill's granddaughter is now married to my grandson. So that's quite a coincidence. So we haven't gotten very far.
Now you need to talk about the boys.
Bill was born when we left Tuscaloosa and went back to New Haven. He was born in New Haven. Doesn't like being called a Yankee. Anyhow, when we came down here, we had 3 more boys: Chris in 52, and Jim in December of 53, and Bobby in 55. And they all, a couple of them started there was a school in Spring Hill. I've forgotten what the name of it was. Grammar school. Anyhow, a couple of them went there, and then they went over to Mary B. Austin, and Jimmy went to St. Paul's kindergarten. But then all of them went through Mary B. Austin, and that's really when I got involved in the church, because the little church was over on Old Shell Road, and Old Shell Road, it was just a barracks. If you've seen pictures of the original church, and there were lots of young people there. all of us had children at Mary B. Austin, so we got to know each other very well, and it was um, it's lots of fun. And the thing that really drew me was I had been to Sunday school in New Haven, but I'd never heard of an adult Sunday school class. And we came down here, and all these young people were were in the Sunday school classes, and I learned more about the Bible certainly here than I ever had. I even had the daughter of the dean of the divinity school who was my teacher, and I don't think I learned much up there except for Abraham and Jacob and Joseph. So that was a lot of fun, starting out with this church with young members of it. Okay, what else?
And Lexi Barnett was in the church, and she was the principal of
Yes,
Mary
she
Austin.
was. Some of the friends knew Lexi Barnett. She comes into the story because my boys kept breaking bones all the time, and Chris broke 2 arms falling out of just a wax privet tree. He broke his 2 arms, and he had 2 casts on, so he couldn't eat. He had to put his sandwich up on the shelf and spread the peanut butter and jelly on it. Couldn't unzip his pants. It's kind of embarrassing. But anyhow, Lexi Barnett was his teacher at that time, and she came to see him, and he was a little embarrassed because he was having to sleep in his brother's bunk bed with his arms, like that. And so Lexi Barnett came to see him. He said he was embarrassed the whole time because his arms were tied up, and he was so afraid she was going to rip his sheet off, and found that he hadn't had anything underneath the sheet. So he spent his time. And then later he got to know he saw her when she was a member of our church, and she was a member of our church. She became the principal there, so that was funny.
She was chosen as principal of the year. I remember nationally at one time, I think. Mm-hmm. Is that about what you want to say about the boys?
Well, the boys got into trouble when they were like 3 and 4. We had friends, 3 little boys lived in the neighborhood, and Chris and Michael and Tony would gang around together, and they would get into trouble. And Pearl, who worked for the Sellers family, said, "Miss Gewin, you better come over here because they just set the garage on fire." So we lived sort of a casual life there. I was probably watching a baseball game and at home. Well, they were safe. They knew that they had to come home when I rang the bell for supper time. They knew they had to come home, and it was casual time, but they turned out okay, except poor Bobby, and that wasn't his fault.
Well, do you want to talk about Dolphin Island now?
Oh, sure. My mother-in-law bought a house at Dolphin Island when they first opened up the bridge, and she let us come down there. She let her daughter come in May, and June and Madge come in June, and Henry and I came in July, which is when all the fishing was. We liked that. And so after a while, her house wasn't air conditioned, and it was kind of close quarters, so Henry and I bought a round house there on Quivira Bay. And so we went down there on his 2 weeks vacation and other times too.
Yeah. You didn't build that roundhouse then. You built it.
It was unfinished, but Henry and Bill finished it up with carpentry. Henry was a great carpenter. He taught his boys how to make things with tools. And so we went to Dauphin Island in the summertime. And I was going to tell you about the boats we have if anybody's interested in the boats. Uh, I didn't know what they were, but we started with a wooden boat, stouter boat that was built in Mobile. Our next one was a Dewcraft, and we took that north of the causeway. Then we had a 24-foot cabin cruiser. It was slow as molasses. We kept it in the house. We kept it on the causeway, and we just would go north of the causeway. Then we got to going out in the Gulf when we had our place at Dauphin Island. Got a fiberglass Boston whaler, and after that we got two tri-hull boats, Power Cat and the Thunderbird. And finally, Henry and his brother Julian went together and bought a 36-foot wooden cabin cruiser. And I drove that, but I really love to drive the power boats, and I love to be out fishing, watching those birds circling around, and I would just head for the birds, and that's where all the Spanish mackerel would be there.
You loved the fishing too, didn't you?
Oh, did I?
You loved the fishing too, didn't you? You loved fishing.
Oh, yes, I love fishing, as I said, and I got to drive the boat because I did not like to clean the fish, and I did not like to spear the bait either, so I did that. And we spent a lot of summers there. We'd watch the sailboat race. We spent a lot of time on Dauphin Island. Then after we built this roundhouse, Henry saw plans for a mountain house, and he liked plans, so he just put that on stilts. And we had gotten interested in bird prints done by Basilide, and I gave Henry one for his birthday, and he ended up getting 20 of them. And these bird prints ended up at Dauphin Island when we sold
They
the
called
house.
it the birdhouse.
That's what we called it, the bird
Here it
house.
is, right here. Let me see it.
It was on stilts. Okay.
What about that night? Was it the Boston Whaler that you were on? That when the rope was caught in the
Oh no, we were on the Maudie G. The maiden voyage of the Maudie G was very eventful. 6 of us went down in the power boat. Had to stay out of the way of the sailboats because the sailors don't like to have you in their wind at all. But we parked ourselves at the finish line so we could watch the sailboats finish coming around. And in doing that, we ran over the anchor line. So there was a lot of bad language going on there. And we had to limp over to the beach. And one of what we called the admirals, the 3 adult guys were the admirals. One of them had to get underwater with a steak knife and unattach that sailboat. It was terrible. Because we thought we were going to definitely be in the way of the sailboats finishing the race. Okay.
when the boys began to leave home? Do you want to talk about that?
That's right. They all how they went. They grew up in Mary B. Austin, but Bill went to 9th grade at Sidney Phillips School, and he had an algebra teacher that was terrible. And Bill was a smart boy, but he couldn't understand algebra at all. And it turned out this teacher didn't even know him. So I transferred him over, Henry and I did, to UMS. Henry and I had both gone to public schools, but we thought it would be better for them. So they all went through, and they even took Bobby, I think, because of his 3 older brothers. So they had good schooling there.
And then they pretty soon they were all gone to college.
They did all go.
They'd all gone to college.
Bill went to Vanderbilt and on to medical school. Chris went to Alabama, and he started pre-med, but he hit organic chemistry, and it didn't go very well for him. So he changed to business school, which is a good thing. His brother said they're so glad he wasn't a doctor because he could handle all our finances. It was wonderful. And Jim went to Vanderbilt, and he's still practicing a doctor. He must be in his 70s, but he loves practicing. He's a family doctor. And Bobby was never a good student, but I didn't know what was the matter with him. We had him tested, and I think he had normal IQ. But he went off. He did go to southern Mississippi for a year or so and didn't do well, and we transferred him to Mobile College. And while he was there, he was 22 years old, and he started acting strangely. He was a great astronomer, and there was an eclipse of the sun in that year. I think it was 1911, I'm not sure when it was. And he wanted to go. And I thought, I don't know if you can handle it. But he begged so, and he went out to Portland. He had cousins who lived out there. And he got on the plane. He didn't know what to do about his luggage. He got to Los Angeles, and he thought he would have to get off. Anyhow, his cousins found out that there was something the matter. He came home, and he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, which often happens in the 20s like that. And it ruined his life, of course. It was bad for him because here was a guy who expected to have all the things that other people do, but mental illness is bad. Anyhow, the worst time of my life, I think, was when Henry and I had to commit him to Searcy Hospital because he just, they were just beginning to get psychedelic medicine that would work. But he was at Searcy for 10 years. It was kind of tough. And finally,
And you became involved in Searcy.
I did get involved in that, and I got to be chairman of the advocacy committee, which makes sure that the patients there get good treatment, that they don't get left in silent, that they don't get left by themselves and everything. So we had to make sure that they had decent treatment. And
she received statewide commendation. It's in here too, in the book.
Okay.
For this.
All right. Well, let's see. So I talked about the boys leaving home. Is that?
Mm-hmm. And then you and Henry had time to travel.
We did have time. Of course, he wouldn't leave off an island at all to go traveling. But finally, Madge and my sister-in-law, talked him into going to Italy with Sam Betty and his group. That was a wonderful, wonderful trip. And we went with other friends from Mobile, and Sam was a good tour director. Then we went to other places, several other places in Europe, several other trips with Sam. And then we started taking tout tours. Our first tout tour was to California. And from there, we went to Canadian Rockies. And we spent time traveling, and that was very good.
We're giving you time now. There's time now to ask the questions that you want to ask Hilda.